Hello and welcome to the Dark Side. You know, I'm very excited to be with you this evening. And guess what? TC Storm is on vacation, so we have a guest host. Woohoo! I'm very excited to introduce my colleague, friend, sister, Pastor Guisele Berkel-Larmonie. She is a pastor here in the Netherlands Church, but she is also the host of Taking Notes. So if you saw that earlier in the year and you're wondering what we're doing, it's coming back and we will be doing some more sessions on that. So look out, watch this space. But without further ado, of course, let me introduce our co-host for the day. Hello. Appropriately, it's an all-girl panel today.
Yes, I do think it fits the topic, doesn't it?
It does. Last week I had the two guys on. It was a lot.
I have to admit that obviously I consider TC Storm to be one of the most capable men I know to be able to explain various sides of a point. And, I find him very strong in not only his arguments, but his willingness to consider various points of view. So I do miss him a little bit. But I do think, on the other hand, that it is quite fitting to discuss women's bodily autonomy with females.
Well, this is it.
Why not?
Why not? While the cat's away, the mice will definitely play. Is what this is. This is an example of. Normally,
in Dutch, the saying actually takes the mice on top of the table, dancing. So it could get pretty wild. It could get pretty wild. But yeah.
I love it. Well, welcome to everyone who are watching. We are here today to talk about women's bodily autonomy, of course. And the reason we picked this topic, and I'll just jump straight in, is because of the news stories over the last couple of weeks that we've had out of Iran. The news coming out of Iran was really just quite, for me, the general news story. I understood what was happening. But it was the videos afterwards that really struck me because they were so similar to things I had seen in other countries. And so you would see women walking along and morality police or just general clerics or just general people out of the public would be assaulting them because they're not wearing their headscarf. And I thought to myself, how many times do we see this actually on the streets everywhere? Like there's not the first time I've seen a woman being assaulted because she doesn't fit something. So I'll introduce the news story and then go over some bits, and then we can get down to the actual nitty-gritty of the conversation, as they say. So
the grit.
The grit of this one. So there's basically the young lady in question. She's 22 years old, was 22 years old. She is, I have to take a deep breath every time I say her name, Mahsa Amini. She was detained by Iran's morality police. And basically what had happened was she was walking down the street. She was wearing a scarf, but too much of her hair was showing, according to the person stood in front of her. And because of that, she was arrested by the morality police on the 30th of September in Tehran. She fell into a coma, is the official line, and later died 3 days later in hospital. The force that did this deny that they did anything wrong. They denied that there was any kind of excessive force being used, but it seems that, of course, there must have been for someone to be in a coma and then die. There's no hesitation to believe such a thing. Yes. But there have been lots of people speaking out. And so in an interview, one of the police officers for the morality police spoke anonymously to the BBC. And it really struck me, some of the things he said. So I want to read some of them to you because I think it really highlights some of the problems that we have with morality and how we interpret our place in society. So something he says is, they are normally told the reasons we are working for the morality police units is to protect women, because if they do not dress properly, then men could get provoked and harmed them. He said they would work in teams of 6, comprising of 4 men and 2 women, and focused on areas with high foot traffic where crowds gathered. He said this is weird because if we're just going to guide people, why do we need to pick such busy places that potentially mean we could arrest more people? It's like we're going out hunting. He then goes on to say, they expect us to force them inside the van. Do you know how many times I was in tears while I was doing this? I want to tell them I'm not one of them. Most of us are ordinary soldiers going through our mandatory military service, and I feel so bad. And it really struck me because I think very quickly when you see and hear and read what's happening, oftentimes what we do is we're like those awful people, right? You can just brush them all off. But then when you hear the individual stories of people within that saying they're not even convinced that what they're doing is correct.
It's the right thing. Yeah.
Right. And but how are you getting swept along with that? And so it did raise some questions. Haha. Look who's actually joining us. He's watching along on vacation.
Of course he is. He's keeping a close eye. It's okay, Mr. Storm. We're trying to do no harm in our own way. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's
although
important.
we're operating autonomously, we're trying. No, but seriously, welcome, Mr. Storm.
It's so
Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
He says he's everywhere. Can you believe it? Check it out. Anyway. Oh dear. Now
you will refrain from this one. Mm-hmm.
I'm just going
to go on my numbers. So I shall refrain from commenting. No, but seriously though. Yes.
Back to the story in question. So just to give a bit of backdrop, Iran hasn't always been like that. And if you look at a pictography, so if you look at a pictorial history of Iran, what you will notice is that in the last 40 years or so, it's almost impossible to see women who don't have scarves, who don't have all of that. But prior to this 40 years, there was miniskirts, hair, and hijabs and other forms of religious clothes,
and
all side by side.
Yes.
And it's important to note that while they talk about what was the Muslim revolution, this also comes on the back of a lot of Western meddling in the country and a reaction towards the deposing of leadership. And so the religious extremists then come to the forefront because people are unhappy with the fact that another country has meddled in their affairs. And so this then breeds this kind of breeding ground for more extremism. However, another thing to note is it depends on who the president is. So
it really does. And not only does it depend on who the president is, it also depends on who the Khomeini is.
Who the Khomeini is, yeah. So you have all of these.
You have the political leader that, stamps, but you also have the religious leader that puts the stamp. And the way they either work in sync with a particular mindset or tend to work against each other, that also tends to play out on how the morality police versus the regular law enforcement operates and how the people there would react. Now, mind you, I am not an international affairs expert. I've, just done some reading like you. I'm just humbly sharing a little bit of bits that I've picked up. But truth be told, that's like that everywhere else. It's almost as if the Iranians are regular human beings. You know what I mean? In that sense, we see the same thing happening in Indonesia, on the various islands, depending on how the religious leadership operates. The people tend to be open or very, closed in how they express their religious beliefs. Whereas on the other hand, you see similar processes as you described based on Western influencing and Western meddling in the local politics. In, for example, Afghanistan, in even Iraq. Hey, let's not talk about Turkey. We see these things playing out because everywhere in all these countries, if there's one thing all of them have in common, is that they're human beings.
Yes.
And we as human beings can be awkward. We really, no, I have to admit that we can be a bit odd. Um, Particularly because all of us want to assert our own right to independently choose whom to serve, how to serve, whether religiously or politically. But we all deal humanly with pushback. Some of us then go, we go quieting down and we back out. Others, would then, go in and gaslight any and everything that's brought to us, whereas others would be open for the conversation. And just like you have that at the individual level, you have that at the sociological level.
Yeah,
and once the group moves into a particular direction, left or right, or somewhere dead in the middle, it really is simply human. And that is one thing that I think is, to me, key in trying to grasp the concept of bodily autonomy, right to assert it, the right to claim it, and the right to be able to make choices based on it. We are all human. That's where it starts.
That is a good starting point.
It's very simple, but and simplistic. But that is where I think it starts for all of us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's something that what have I done? Outhouse Ministries is trying to share with us. It's difficult to speak out against injustice. It's easier just to comply, as we saw with and he's using a case study example of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Germany during the Holocaust period, and the tensions that ran there.
As much
but
as
I think that
is
speaks
true.
to his point. I think he was speaking to the point that I made, that you hear the struggle that the individual police officer has, and how difficult he complies with, that he's still complying with the regulation. Even though he's crying, he's still pushing the woman into the van. He's still doing the things he's supposed to, because he's serving as is part of his service. And I think that's the point to which he's responding to, is this idea that actually we comply, we tend to go along. And there's a point that you made as well, that once the crowd moves a certain direction, it's very difficult to stand out of the crowd.
Very difficult. Particularly as well, I'll come back to that one, Storm, in a second. Particularly as well, when it comes to speaking out while you are in uniform, and you are, you have accepted a couple of terms and conditions in which you are serving, that means that you have to go as commanded. And one word that came to, or a notion that came to my mind as you shared that example, was conscientious objectors. Unless you have stated in advance that you're not willing to push anybody into a bus, right? And still manage to get the job, while you just said that you would not do that under any circumstances. It's impossible to refuse to do it once you're there on the spot. So I do feel for him. I really do feel for him. But it is, in that sense, part of the job.
Yeah, as I said, I think it was an interesting, because I think I wanted to bring out this officer's story, because most of the things that we're seeing, of course, are from women's perspective, are from Western journalist eyes looking in, saying what they believe is happening, which I think has bias, of course, to it, and has other hidden agendas that may be put forward, as you would say. But hearing the voice of someone who's actually live on the ground, and who is doing the work, who's actually doing a job that many would say is unconscionable, I would say would feel very unconscionable to me. I think it's interesting to hear his take on actually how many of us are compliant within the system, how much pain is on both sides. The fact that we're doing something that doesn't make sense. I logically know that what I'm doing is illogical. I know that if I'm going down to a crowded area, these women are safe. So obviously this is not an issue. It would make sense if, you know, there's all of these disconnects that are being made. And he's definitely kind of pushing that question out there. And obviously there is this issue of, you know, we're doing this for your best interest. This was the line that really struck me. If you don't dress appropriately, someone is going to do some harm to you. Well, you who's beating me up so that I could put the thing on appropriately is the one that's doing harm to me, you know?
Well, that, you know, that seems like a basic contradiction, terminus. You know, I shall beat you up so that nobody else can harm you. But the question is, and the question will always be in, you know, those specific settings, what was said, who was triggered, why were they triggered in the way they were triggered, and how were they trained to cope with certain triggers? How were they trained to respond to particular attitudes or whatever was being said or whatever was being done? I'm reminded of a quite startling little snippet on the news that was aired about a week and a half ago here on the Dutch news station, that the correspondent in Moscow was interviewing a bystander prior to the announced protests against the war in Ukraine. Yeah. And all she did was ask this young girl, why are you here? And the girl basically said, yeah, you know, I consider the war to be a problem or something like that. Something really innocuous, really innocent. Bam, two guards come up, pick her up right in front of the journalist, take her into the bus, and that's it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, you know, and we understand that the situation is different. The setting is completely different. The issues are completely different. But those guards are trained and they're sent out to a specific task. And so are these moral coppers in Iran.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
they may not consider it to be an issue themselves personally, but that doesn't mean that they can disobey their the authorities on top of that. Yeah, they're senior.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Mariska brings out another point, of course, which we know from around the world. It's not only in Iran, which is that many people from that region and other neighboring countries and other places are actually their officers are being threatened. They're you know, do this, or as you said earlier in the conversation, you don't have a job. Do this, or you don't have your life. Do this, or we'll arrest you and your family. Do this, or da da da. You know, the and or is a really a huge part of that process. Sorry.
And it's horrible for them to be in that situation, and that's why, you know, we really I'm really thankful you brought the story, because it's necessary for us here in the West, who are, as you said, looking in, well, trying to peep in, really,
trying to peep in desperately.
To keep in mind that not everybody that is part of the system wants to be part of the system, nor is he or she able to not be part of the system. Yeah.
I'm hoping that this is all going out properly. Sorry, I was just double checking my
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think this, since we're getting such awesome responses. Thank you for that, Mariska.
We are. Thank you so much. Okay, so Mr. Storm is in and he says, is the problem in Iran not the exact same as the issue in the USA? In truth, perhaps the USA is worse, as they don't even bother to tell you the lie that it's in the woman's best interest, which I think Mr. Storm is trying to move me towards my next page of research.
I think he really is he?
Kind of like, now move on to your next. I'm not there to move you on. Come on, lady, get going. So what I did was I actually looked at then, because as I said, for me, what was really startling about seeing these women being abused because of their hair, and let's be clear, it's about the level of hair. So some would have like this tiny strand showing, some had a full hair, and no matter what, they were having the same reaction. And of course, all of this is very subjective.
Yes.
There's no, morality police issue of the woman's hair being covered and what triggers them is very subjective. Women spoken about being arrested because her boots were seen by one of the morality police female officers as being too seductive. So she had to call her husband to bring her shoes and sign a piece of paper which gave her a criminal record that she actually wore something that was immoral. A pair of boots. Okay, that's how deep it got. So the subjectivity of the issue is also
Makes
something.
you wonder what size the boots were and what size the officer who was signed up for had.
I had
Okay,
all kinds of questions.
I am being mean. I'm being mean. No, but still,
But it was
yeah.
the tip of the iceberg of many stories.
It's subjective, and I have to admit that based on our taking notes conversations, one of the conversations we had, I consciously did not make an effort to unfrizz my hair tonight. Okay, talk about bodily autonomy, because we came to understand, not only during that interview, but subsequently in several other posts, including on Twitter and on Facebook. I came to understand that there are issues with something that you call a twist out, or with showing too much volume when it comes to one's hair, because that would not be considered to be humble or be considered to be, wanting to distract the good brethren and the sistren from holding on to the faith. And I'm thinking, okay, let's talk about that then. I mean, I know people who have struggled because they made the choice to have dreadlocks at the younger age. And I remember speaking to one of my former members who has amazing locks. When I say amazing, I mean long and amazing.
You mean the ones that are really like, they just
really, really lengthy, long, gone.
Yes. The locks I've met, yes.
And the thing is that she's like, but most people just judge me on the locks without asking me why it is that I don't want to cut my hair. And that's one of the many examples when it comes to hairdos, when it comes to what extent you cover it up under the hijab, or under the
under the church girl hat.
Yes, it really it might help to ask why a certain choice was made, rather than just qualifying or classifying or declassifying a hairdo based on your own basic premise and opinion and experience. Maybe I don't know how to handle my hair. Maybe I ran out of money. I have no money for products. Maybe you just need to sit elsewhere if you find that my hair is disturbing you from blocking stay in the pulpit. No, because that happened to me once. It happened to me once. I was visiting that church community. I was not pastoring, I wasn't preaching that day. But I was visiting a church community once where somebody behind me asked if I could do something about my hair. Yeah, I had it like similar to this. It was just slightly more like Shaka Khan. And I was like, no. The answer is no, even though she didn't ask me why. I figured, because me being me, I just told her the reason I cannot do anything else about my hair is because I don't know how to handle my hair differently at the minute. And so if you like to, either we swap chairs, if it helps you, or you really have to find yourself another seat. I'm willing to swap, or you find yourself another seat.
Oh, you're so accommodating.
So we ended up swapping. Well, you always say I'm the nicer one.
You are the nicer one. So for those of you that missed the kind of link there, just quickly recap. So we do another podcast called Taking Notes. And on that podcast, we were interviewing women in leadership roles on Women's International Day. Great podcast. Please go back and listen to it if you can. It's on the Past to Purple stream, so you can find it there. It was a great conversation. And then one of the stories that came out during that time of talking about the traps or the challenges or the interesting moments that we have in leadership is that our physical appearance can be heavily monitored, policed, interpreted, misinterpreted by others. And as women of color, this then brings a whole different level, because this is one of the intersectionalities of race and gender that come out, is actually the policing of Black women's hair, particularly the policing of Black women's hair, has become such a thing that somebody felt entitled to tap our dear sister here on the shoulder and tell her that she needed to basically do something about her hair because it was distracting them from service. She, being more gracious than I, switched places with the person and was really nice. But I think it leads, and the link is to lead to this point of subjectivity around, particularly around women's hair, body, their experience. And we are talking about
wear, how they wear it, where they wear it to, what they're combining it with. I mean, we are living in a world and at a time where, honestly, even if you are wearing Prada, even if you're wearing the best, most amazing brands of, fair trade cotton and, hand dyed, knitted wear and properly fairly paid labor, etc., you will still get judged. You will still be judged for not wearing it, wearing the cocktail dress at a cocktail event, etc. But next to that, next to the subjectivity of not liking or appreciating what you have brought or how you've brought yourself, is this notion that it is connected to your moral compass. And that is something that, we find it even in the Bible. We find it as far as in the Old Testament. I mean, when was it Tamar that refused to let his third son marry this lady who seemed very, very unlucky with husbands because they kept dying on her, right? He was at some roundabout or whatever turn or whatever else, and he saw a girl, and the girl is described as being dressed like a harlot. Now, what's that supposed to mean? Did she have like the Pretty Woman leather boots on or something with a miniskirt? What was she wearing? You know what I mean?
Customs and cultures, man. Customs and cultures, eh? Customs and cultures.
What I'm saying? I mean, I grew up with back in the 80s and the 90s on a Dutch Caribbean island of Curacao, where this notion was, a cultural notion was, that if you had an anklet, so like a bracelet around your ankle, that stood for loose and divorcee, etc. And I'm like, come on, people, really and truly, if this is if it is really as simple as where you wear your jewelry is how we shall judge your moral compass, then we have a lot of work to do when it comes to how men dress.
Well, now
there seems to be less fuzz about male clothing. And there seems to be less.
There's like grey tracksuit season, isn't there, for women? Isn't that what they're always talking about? Women get really excited when the men's grey tracksuit season begins. I wouldn't know anything about that, but
I remember a time that I was informed that tracksuits are the most unsexy thing a woman could wear. And now, we're all rocking it. Possibly that might fit the morality police idea better. But, without wanting to dismiss the influence of culture and the fact that, there are historical chains following women around when it comes to the notion of what we wear or how we wear it, that denotes our morality. Really and truly, there is way less documentation on what men wear and their morality, what men wear and what it says about them, how they carry themselves physically, and what that shares about whatever, or how we could interpret or should interpret what they're bringing to the table when it comes to their moral compass. And that begs the question, why does humanity, because this is not just Christianity, this is humanity, seem to be so bothered by that?
Yes.
Now, I've got a theological plausible answer, but I'm a no, I mean,
well, no, I have a similar. I probably have a similar theological answer.
Exactly, I'm a Christian. We have a fair idea where that might have come from. However, do we really stand and think about where things came from? Why these notions are there? How they could have grown so out of proportion over the centuries, and how much harm they have caused over the years, in individual lives, but as to humanity in total, but particularly to females through the ages.
So let me underline your point by giving our viewers and listeners some examples, if you want, to just help them to solidify that this isn't just an Iranian issue, it's not just an Islam issue, it certainly isn't just a Christian issue. So if we think about some of the dark side stories that we covered a story on breastfeeding. So here's where morality plays into the idea of breastfeeding. So if a mother doesn't breastfeed, of course, she can be seen as depriving the child. She can be seen of all of these things. However, if she then
the child from nutrition and
right, she was seen as a bad mother. She can have all of these connotations put upon her if she's seen with a bottle. However, if the same woman is seen breastfeeding, she can also then be under attack for exposing herself. And why is she covered? Why isn't she covered? No matter how you cover up, children move. They're allowed to. They breathe. They move. They are free to do that. And so, at some point, a breast will be out of doors. That's just the reality of it. No matter how slick and tidy you are. But we have seen
never happened to me. That never ever. Sorry.
I'm actually trying to think. I'm trying to think of my most embarrassing story with that, but I'm going to let that go. But I do remember they did the study where they actually went into a very well-known shopping mall, and they put a breastfeeding woman in front of a very well-known bra store, and there was a very giant picture of a woman in just a bra, and then a woman trying to breastfeed, and people were coming up.
I saw that one. Yeah, I heard about that one.
There was a whole naked ass lady behind them.
No, that wasn't offensive.
That wasn't offensive.
That was not offensive. Sustaining a kid, keeping a baby alive was offensive. Yes, I remember that one. Yeah.
So you get the idea that your even your bodily function as breastfeeding, not breastfeeding, breastfeeding in public, hiding to breastfeed, all of those things which are just a natural, it's just a natural, breastfeeding is just a natural bodily function that we do, is somehow your morality and the judgment is then linked to that. That's a story that we covered here. We've covered stories about the causes of rape. Okay. And so we looked at the way that people interpret the questions that are asked to the victims of rape. What were you wearing? What were you drinking? How long you've been out? And then there was a show put on in New York where they put those questions next to the items of clothing, people in jogging bottoms, trousers, jeans, because actually what you're wearing has no bearing. Rape is a power issue. And so the idea that the morality of the woman is being questioned when she's a victim of a crime, this is you're literally a victim of a crime, and then this whole thing plays out. And then the issue that I led with at the beginning, which is really for me quite reminiscent of this, is this idea that particularly within the USA, you have all of these very passionate people who are pro-life, but somehow not pro living human beings. And so they bomb cars, they beat people that are coming in and out of clinics, they abuse the workers, they throw things, they do all kinds of things. And then I I read one of the most interesting things I could possibly read, which was an article that said under President Obama, overall rates of abortion decreased actually quite a lot under President Obama's leadership. So over the 8 years, they decreased quite a lot. I can't remember the exact percentage, so I won't tell you what that is, but they decreased quite a lot. Under President Trump's presidency, they increased. The person writing the article, again with the subjectivity about women's bodily autonomy, said, well, President Obama, I felt, should have, as a Christian, been more pro-life and talks about the fact that abortion was wrong and just given, you know, the hardline position. And, you know, because Trump did that, that's better. The numbers speak differently. So the idea that the woman's autonomy to make a choice for herself being challenged under President Trump, because it was challenged, and of course it was repealed, blah, 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 and all of those problems that have happened out there, that the woman's bodily autonomy challenged openly, publicly, viciously under his leadership led to an increase in choices that maybe may not have gone that way before that case. But under the other leadership, where the idea of promoting a woman's autonomy, because President Obama was very much about promoting women's bodily autonomy, promoting the fact that women and girls should read.
Not just female bodily autonomy. Yes, everybody's bodily autonomy.
Yeah. But I think it was particularly pro-women.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it does. The thing is, obviously, it speaks to everybody's imagination after centuries of, you know, the whole moral policing of female bodies. And, you know, if you've got your period, you stick to your tent and you don't move because you're a threat, right? Down to, you know, granting more. It's obvious that it's logic and it's logical to have more females. How you know, to have to focus more on women, female bodily autonomy. However, it is important to note that the whole bodily autonomy discussion also entails topics that are extremely uncomfortable, like suicide, like physical mutilation, like getting a tattoo when you're 12. Like, I mean, you know, if we're gonna
changes,
really, because you know, one question I had for you, and I really hope that this is a good time to ask it, and maybe our audience tonight wants to help us out with that, is what do you understand under the term bodily autonomy?
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Do you know, I wrote hastily when I wrote the title under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. I wrote very hastily, and then I spent the rest of the week regretting my choice of words that I put out into the world. So when I think about bodily autonomy, I think I often frame it particularly from a woman's perspective. I must confess, I think that it's not that I don't believe that men should have bodily autonomy. Should or shouldn't have bodily autonomy. Is that for me, I guess, as a woman who has borne the brunt of the male gaze, etc., 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 on and on and on with the list of things that, you know, misogyny, mansplaining, abuse, da 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 da. Having autonomy, having the right to actually be a whole person in my body without somebody else telling me what I should be doing with that body, how I should be expressing myself, how I should be living in the world without it being something that they almost criminalize, to me that's how I think about bodily autonomy. Because for me, it's a lived experience. It's a lived kind of thing, which is why I think I immediately regretted doing it, because I don't think that's actually the working definition of bodily autonomy. But
yeah, no, but I understand. Well, I mean, the thing is that I do agree that that is what the discussion should be about. And I really appreciated the website for human rights media. because there it's described as being bodily autonomy is a right granted to every person to have the right to control what are the things to be or not done to their own bodies. When each person has full bodily autonomy, they're not only empowered to decide things when it comes to their health and future without constraints or any control by other people, but they also have the support and resources that are needed to eloquently carry out all the decisions they would make. So it's not just having that right, but also being able to fully exercise that right
Right.
and to have the resources to exercise that right.
Mm.
Now, I think that what most people hear or think of when they see bodily autonomy is the whole abortion right thing, and completely foregoing on the fact that it is about having the right to do, to be, to wear, to act out
Yes.
how you deem best,
Mm-hmm.
being also able to have the right resources to do so. Mind you, there is one little element to that though. And it's not me playing devil's advocate, but I do have to bring this up.
Okay.
And that is that if I was to fancy, exercising my bodily autonomy and slap somebody across the face in the middle of the supermarket, you know, that is not what this is about. This is not about having a right to hurt another. This
No.
has had only to do with having the right to be who you are and what
Right.
you need to do as a person and having the resources to do so. And to
Wasn't
a
far from
lot of
what I did, you
people,
see?
yeah, but to a lot of people, you cannot have the one without the other, because I remember listening
Mm.
to a presentation panel discussion a couple of years back, and somebody said, well, if women are allowed to and have the right to do whatever they want, then whatever creep has the right to sit and do whatever he fancies in his raincoat on a playground with kids playing.
No.
um
How that works.
and and that's the thing.
How
I
that
I
works.
think that it primarily needs to be restricted to what you, for your person,
It's the expression of self in a safe.
expression of
Yeah.
self, and
Yeah.
being able to make the choices and have the resources to do so. So, for example, to have the right to go to school, the right to education, to have for kids the right to play and have the right resources to play at their level, of development, their stage of development. So, in that sense, having the right to express your
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
for example, a tattoo if you want to. I'm not saying I'm promoting tattoos. I'm just
No, but
saying that in and of
I was
itself,
thinking about the person who split the
dye
tongue.
your hair or to,
Hmm.
have it
Hmm.
out,
Hmm.
or to, not wear your glasses if you don't fancy it, even though you're half blind. Um, it's your right.
Hmm.
In and of itself, it is your right. Where people get uncomfortable is where it hits their sphere.
Right.
And there is where I think the conversation needs to be honest. That if we understand why it is that we've been fascinated with these kind of topics for the
Mm.
past, how many centuries, ever since, Adam bit the apple, then it might as well be useful to try to demark, or to try, as I said, to try to outline where the limits are. Where does my bodily autonomy start to infringe on yours?
Right.
And if it starts to infringe on yours, like for example, a creep sitting in the park in his raincoat, right, with kids playing, then it is infringing on the kids' safety. and it infringes on their space, and it infringes on their right to play, and therefore he should not be there. Yeah. However, me wearing my hijab wrong, or me having my hair not treated properly with enough products, does that really infringe on your rights, on your space, on your development? Does it limit you to be
Yeah.
able to live your life fully and exercise your right to live fully?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If the answer to that is no, then maybe we need to start letting certain things go.
You know, listen, I think you're right, 100%. I'm not going to disagree with you, but I also, well, no, not but. In addition to that,
Mhm,
what I would also add is that you asked a really critical question, which was, when does my bodily autonomy hit on another person's bodily autonomy, right? When does this,
mhm.
where is the crossover limit? You said
Yeah.
the tension is where it you know, where it begins to cross over. And
Mhm.
I would then just challenge people to really to take a step back and say, actually, when does a person's bodily autonomy cross over into your field? Because the majority of times a person's bodily autonomy crosses over
Yeah.
into another person's, it's actually illegal. So hear me out on this. You
Yeah,
use the
I hear
example
you.
of
Fred.
glasses.
Mhm.
You use the example of glasses. You have a right not to wear your glasses. It's up to you. You want to wear your glasses if you're half blind, go ahead. You don't want to wear them, that's up to you. That's your business. However, you cannot drive a car without your glasses on. If you're half blind,
Mhm.
you need your glasses. So the point at which it impacts another person is actually the point at which we've put laws in place to ensure other people's safety.
Exactly.
When you're talking about the man exposing himself in a public area, there are laws surrounding keeping children safe and people safe and public nudity to
Yes.
actually ensure that people are safe. So the idea that someone's clothing is, especially if we take it away from Iran now, where their laws are different to our laws, and we put this within a Western context where people are judged for their clothing and are not promoted. They're judged for their hair and not given jobs. They're judged for their, and this disproportionately affects Black and brown people. If I'm going to say that very, and it
Oh yeah.
disproportionately affects,
Yeah.
you know,
Disproportionately. Yeah.
Black and brown women, particularly if you
Oh
have
yeah.
type 4C hair, right? It
Mhm.
disproportionately affects you if you fall within these categories, because what someone deems as bothering them, what someone deems as this is now affecting me, if
Mhm.
I stopped them right dead in their tracks and say, tell me how is it actually affecting
How?
you? If
Yeah.
you just run me through a list of things that are affecting you, just let's go for it. Let's see if we can work this out. The reality is it has no impact on the person's life whatsoever. Nothing.
No, it does. It
It doesn't
doesn't.
do
And
anything.
here is where the rubber hits the road of having a conversation that there is something completely different going on
Mhm.
between what is moral and
Right.
just
Mm-hmm.
and right
Mm-hmm.
and legal,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously all these terms have their definitions and they're different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What is right is not necessarily what's legal. Okay. Because you've also had a discussion about teenagers being able to marry in the States, right? As long as their parents consent, they can just go
As
off.
low as 12.
Exactly. So, truth be told, I cannot deem that to be right, but it is legal in certain states. So, please
Where
consider
the
all these
law
terms.
is actually impacting, where a misogynistic law of children, girls particularly, being the property of their family. So now they don't have bodily autonomy because your
Oh, no, no,
family
no, no, no,
can
no,
give
true,
up that
true,
right
true.
at
Yes,
any point
yes,
and say, I
yes,
am signing you over to
yeah,
another person. You've
yeah.
actually taken away a whole entire human being's bodily autonomy
For
by
the
saying,
autonomy.
I have the right to sign
True.
your life away to another person. That's what that
Yeah.
means in the United States. I mean, that's the real crux of the matter when you get down to
Well,
it.
not only in the States.
No,
We
it
also,
doesn't affect
you
other
know,
places around the world.
yearly in the Netherlands, we lose sight of so many students aged 12, 13, 14 because they're, shipped back to their parents' native countries and they are to be seen no more. And then you hear that they got married. So it does happen. It happens. It's really sad. But it happens. But again, so you have this whole notion of what is considered to be the right thing in whatever capacity, whether legally, morally, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also something called preference. Now, it might not be your preference, as it is not mine personally, to have a gold tooth or to have like diamonds encrusted and stuck on your front tooth. It's not my thing. But if it is yours, who am I to then, try to suggest that maybe it would be good to visit a dentist? I mean, it's none
Or
of my.
tell you that somehow you're morally deficient
How?
because you've
How?
decided to express yourself in
Exactly.
that way. Do you know, this brings me to another case. So this was a case we covered. This was around the Olympic time. And I don't know if you remember this, but again, this was to do with bodily autonomy. This was now to do with the fact that more women of color and Black women particularly were entering swimming events. And because of that, the question of hair had become an issue. So how do we use a hair cap? Now, with different texture hair comes the different needs. And the international, the
IOC.
Thank you.
International Olympic Committee.
Deemed, I was trying to find it in my head. They had deemed that every woman, regardless of hair type, regardless of whatever, should be able to use the standard swim cap because it's aerodynamic and it's right. And they refused to authorize the new Afro swim cap under the guise that it would give them an advantage. Okay, so this was their guy. So now the question that challenged back was, how you will have an advantage if it's bigger and less aerodynamic? Like, what advantage are you going to have that there is now more rubber? Because, of course, the Afro hair cap was actually a bigger hair cap and actually had a different way of tying in order to ensure the safety of
keep it all in.
To keep it all in, right? So it's a thing. And it was repealed. So this ruling was repealed and it is now allowed. And we're really happy that they did that. But for years, they were refusing to allow under this notion and under many excuses. And every time the excuses were debunked, yes, but no was the answer, right? It was yes, but no. Yeah, we hear you, but no. Because somebody's personal preference was in the end keeping an entire populace of women, world majority, out of a swimming pool, like out of competition. And say no.
But it's not. And here is where I need to I feel I need to correct you a little bit. This is not just somebody's preference. These ideas are systemically ingrained. They're systemically ingrained. And I mean, I'm from an island. We love to swim. However, swimming competitions and hair upkeep are just an issue. It's not a hobby that I went for per se because it is a real challenge. Now, it being that challenge in itself already limits a lot of people to develop the skills, even though you could be a reasonable swimmer to a very good swimmer. But to be able to grasp how these preferences, how these cultural precepts of what should be or how it should look or how it has always been traditionally. You remember when Venus first came on the scene, selling tennis with them phenomenal hips, right?
Serena.
I have to admit that, we all had to take a couple of looks at how that little tiny tennis skirt was fitting her and thought to ourselves, why? This is not good. This is not the way to know. And thank God the adjustments followed. However, and yes, I think I quickly saw Storm's
The Storm's
comment there.
comment was, come on, of course they're going to keep black women out of swimming.
They made,
They made the mistake of letting them out of tennis. They ain't doing that again.
They're not going there again. Look at what happened to the turn and gymnastics.
Yeah, we've already had
So,
gymnastics taken over now. They're doing another thing. But I want
no,
to
but it's
say
so
on the
important
point
to
of
understand, yes, that the whole notion
yeah,
is, it's not something that
in
can be
systemic issues.
changed overnight, but it needs to be addressed as a whole. On the one hand, the bodily autonomy. So I do have the right to swim, and I do have the right to excel at a sport, but I'm not allowed to have long hair in the process because it happens to be curly. So I should cut it for the sport, etc. So um that takes me to another thing that I needed to ask you, because I mean you invited me onto this, so it's your own fault. It's your own fault. It's your own fault, right? But in which ways do you believe that this whole discussion worldwide around bodily autonomy is something that is more based on limitations or reading or wanting to set up limitations based on this whole idea of what is natural or unnatural versus what is Christian or religiously appropriate? So, where do you find that the intersection is, or the intersection lies between that notion of the argument for natural, a natural process or a natural um, filter to limit versus the religious one? How do you see that? How do you find that? Do you see that?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm working through the question, trying to understand it. To be fair, but in doing that, there is a number of things that strike me. One is, what is the definition of what is natural? I think that comes to
Mm-hmm.
mind, because I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people say, oh, well, we only want what is natural and what is deemed as the normal state of
Uh-huh.
what a person is. But then if a man has a dysfunction with his penile area, they're quite happy to write prescription after prescription to stop that. But they wouldn't want to write prescription after prescription to help a woman with her facility or with her bodily function,
Yeah.
which is natural. And so there is this real tension between these definitions and ideas, because actually what we deem to be natural isn't often natural, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If we let
Mm-hmm.
nature run its course, we'd be thinning the herd quite a lot, if I put it like that. We would just
Yeah, no, that's true.
lose a lot of
That's
people along the way.
that's very true.
Um,
Yes.
so I think there's an idea about the kind of natural that I query and question. And then there's the idea of where does religion play a part into that? How
Yeah.
does religion play a part into that? And what sets of frameworks do we have? And I think that this is where we really should be careful, because I think you used a really critical word earlier to kind of bring me back on point, which is systemic. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so important to realize that we're culturally steeped and in systems at play, all of us,
Yeah.
that affect everyone within our system, whether we like it or not, whether we agree to it or not. The textbooks we read, the hereditary issues that we have, how we're
Yes.
raised, the society that we live in, the advertising we received is all steeped in, and if you're in a Western country, predominantly
Yeah.
white supremacy, right? That's the capitalist white supremacy. That's the notion that's
Yeah.
the dominant theme within European, Western European, USA based societies. Those
Mm-hmm.
ideas come out. Who's affected by that? Everyone. Black people, Asian
Everyone.
people,
Yeah.
white
Yeah.
people, no matter who you are, no
Yeah.
matter where you're from. We're all
Yeah.
burnt into that process, including our religious ideas. So
Yeah.
when we come with that now and we
Because it's part
pretend
of it. It's part of it.
it's part of the process, and so
Yeah.
we can
Yeah.
pretend to say that we are really pro-life because we have this religious belief about the point of conception and where that is, except for the fact that all the major religions across the globe have a different understanding within their own denominator, within their own religion, not just different religions, but within your own religion you have the differences, because their culture, the answers can be really culturally interpreted. They are steeped within the history and the nation. So for me, when I think about bodily autonomy and I think about the dichotomies that we have in these things, the thing that actually comes up for me is there is a real power dynamic at play. There has always been a power dynamic at play, and there will continue to be a power dynamic at play unless we actually continue to keep pushing against the idea that someone else has power to tell an entire, because it's not, we talk about it individually, which is true, but it is a collective problem.
Yes, it is a societal problem.
It's a societal problem. Yes. The idea that it's borne out by just me, or just, it's borne out in just this way is actually false, because why is it my experiences as a woman living in the UK, blah blah blah, and you've grown up in the Caribbean and then grown up in the Netherlands, and we can talk about very similar experiences as women. Because the culture is a collective issue, and so I think that's, for me, the tension is power and collectiveness, and what affects
collectiveness.
What has it together. The naturalness of it is less so an issue, because we're always messing with natural. We're always messing with natural. We mess with natural from the time we come out all the way till the time we die. If truth be told, right? Men are always messing with natural. Why are you pumping iron? It's not natural. Why are you out in the gym? It's not natural. What are you doing? You were born with that amount of muscles. You'll be fine.
Stick with it. You were born with that gut. Live with it.
You're a little pudgy, you're a little skinny, doesn't matter. Why you? So this idea of what is natural, quote unquote, it's so flexible. It's so manipulative, because what you're actually saying is what I deem to be natural. Because when women came, so when the big arguments are made in grand sweeping gestures of, well, tough, we're not going to remove the tax on women's period products because it's profitable and it's just another business, blah blah blah. So then women said, oh, well, so we should tax things that are just for men, for your facial removal, because it's just normal. But oh no, we don't want that. Well, hang on. You can't have, it's who is the power that is determining what it is. And oftentimes religion can be manipulated, used, and forced into looking like something, whatever the religion is. And this is now not even for Christianity or Islam, but this for any religion, can be actually manipulated into looking like it supports an ideology because there is power. But the actual, when you go back to the text, you're like, how y'all get there? How did you get, what? How did you end up in this position? And there comes the reality of the life of faith. I think if I then step back and say, for a person of faith, this is where the rubber meets the road. Because while I would not want to be a snake person, there are people who really have that strong desire, and they have the right to then do all kinds of things to their body, including splitting the tongue and putting nodules on their heads, and I don't know, all kinds of things that these people do, that they want to do that. Not my cup of tea. No, but I don't have a ground to stand on to turn around and say this is what it is. And so I didn't read the comments, but I now see that I was there wandering on, and Storm has come in with the argument of natural versus religious is, of course, not to me. It isn't about natural, nor is it about religion. It's about power, which is a much simpler version of what I said, of course. Well done.
Yes. Thank you.
And then brought up the case of Casta Semenya. Now, this is a case we've spoken about on the Darkside so many times, because it actually pains me every time I hear her name. I choke. This is a woman who has gone through hell and back, has been subjected to abuse, if you ask me. They have done every kind of open your legs, do this test on her, to say that she can be excluded from a sport where she excels at. But it's natural. She didn't do anything. She was born. This was all she did, was to be born and be gifted at this
born the way she was born.
and that's it.
Yeah.
And yet still the argument would go that people who are born with a disconnect between their gender and their bodily autonomy, that
Mm-hmm.
is being then idolized and promoted and blah blah blah, but this woman cannot
Yes.
get fair treatment. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you should then treat them badly because you treat her badly. What
No,
instead I'm
absolutely
saying
not. But
that you should
it is
treat her
not a
better.
fair line. They're
Like, it's
not,
not fair.
not they're not being how you say they're not sticking to their story. They're
No,
not sticking to their basic premise.
no.
And that's extremely, extremely sad.
Yeah.
That is extremely sad. Well, now I know that normally you all speak for about an hour, and we've barely scraped the surface.
Yes, indeed.
And it's not that I'm trying to force my way into another discussion because, but still, I do believe, I really do hope that at the end of the day, we will come to a point, at least within our sphere of influence, Tabitha,
Mm, mm.
that we can encourage people to really look closely at why it is that they think
Right,
the way they think.
right.
And I think, I want to say this when it comes to the dark side. You guys do explore the why the people and how the processes got to be the way they are. And I really pray for your ministry to continue to thrive and for more people to be encouraged that it is okay to question where it is that you got your premises from, where
Yeah,
you got your basis from, where you got your what you would deem to be your moral compass from.
yep, absolutely.
Because and in that sense I really believe that we both share this. When God asks you what you did with the
Mhm.
time and the resources that were granted to you, you need to be able to really stand for the choices you made.
Right.
Understand why it is that you're making the choices that you're making. Yes, please
Yeah.
do. Please do. Think about it. Think about it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think what I hope, especially listening to us talk about it today, I think that what I would hope that our listeners and our viewers would take away from this is that everything we do and say is steeped within um, our upbringing. It's steeped within our context to context. What is your context? What is your cultural understanding? It isn't simply good enough to say that this is just the right thing to do. Why is it the right thing to do? Because what was right yesterday is not right today. And it's not always good enough to say what is the legal thing to do, because what was legal yesterday is illegal
Could be
today.
changed. Yeah.
What is the kind of guiding principles that we have? I think we really need to get to a place, as you say, of asking deep questions about what we're doing and why we're doing it, because in the end, my freedom is bound to your freedom. We
Yes.
cannot be moving forward in a space where we are judging each other based
No.
on appearance. The
No.
idea that, and I will take it back to our lead story, the idea
Yes.
that you could punch somebody because you don't like the way they're dressed in the name of saying you're saving them or you're
You're
keeping
keeping
them
them
safe
safe.
is not just ironic, it's just how far we have gone from what would be moral and what would be the right way of thinking, and really examining what we're doing. And we do this all the time. For us in Western societies, it's easy to look down on those people over there, but
Yeah.
you do exactly the same when you read the name on a job CV and you say, oh no, not that person, because you have
Yeah.
a preconceived bias. You do exactly the same when the person sitting in front of you looks
Yeah.
differently to you, and you treat them differently and you dismiss them. You do exactly the same when, as you said, your friend with the locks is judged without even a conversation, a blink, or anything. We do exactly the same when the person taps you on the shoulder and says, do you mind? Do something
Hmm.
about your hair. We do exactly the same when we all turn a blind eye when it's, Caster Semenya doing something, when it's all of these cases. And unfortunately, we're entering a period where, especially within Europe, it's going to get darker. The evenings get darker, which means there's less vitamin D. We're all feeling a little less chirpy than we were before. But suicide rates begin to creep up. Mental health begins to suffer, because actually a lot of times we're not asking the why. We're jumping to judgment. We're jumping to abuse.
The conclusions.
Into all of these things.
Our conclusion. We're not jumping to a collective conclusion. We're jumping to our conclusion based on our basic premise and our basic experience, which might be so different from the other that you could cause harm. Indeed, please think it through, people.
Just think it through. That's what I would say. It's easy to sit in judgment and say, well, I wouldn't, I don't, it's not natural, it's not normal, and I wouldn't worry, and to dismiss another person's suffering. What's not easy is to ask, well, why do I think that? Why do I think this isn't normal? And to go down the rabbit hole of actually unpacking the systemic issues that you've been taught at school, that you've been taught by family, that you've been taught within your religious setting, that say that this, whatever this choice is somehow morally tied to the person's moral compass for their whole life, as opposed to actually saying, hey, I've come to the wrong conclusion, and this person has a right to their bodily autonomy. They have a right to their expression. They have a right to be who they are without fear of me coming and, slapping them, jumping down their throat and giving them what for. They have that. So, I hope that our viewers and our listeners do understand that. We haven't given you a framework to do it. So that will be for another day.
We haven't. We've kept nicely away from now on.
We have. So good luck with your framework. Go do your research. Come back, let us know how you get on.
No, but we are still learning and growing as well, because it's not the case that we are not, or that we're free from biases, or that we're free from our own moral compass, on certain occasions infringing on the bodily autonomy of another person. And it's important to understand that in that sense, once again, we're all human beings, and none of us are perfect. None of us.
Nope.
None of us are perfect.
Nope.
And I would say thank God for that.
World. No, we live in the chaos is my favorite way of describing us. We live in chaos. And I think that we have to all admit our place in the chaos.
In that,
so,
yes.
We have a final little comment here, and then we're going to finish up, and let's hope. I don't know what it says, so let's see. Is Iran and the religious far right in the USA not the illegitimate child of what happens when power and religion, which pushes the omnipotence of God first and foremost? Oh my.
That's a lovely question for TC Storm to come and discuss himself.
Yeah, good. So, in meditation, you all can just have that point, and when he wants to discuss that about,
because the thing is, again, you're pointing out Iran and the US, but this is everywhere. This is not just even in China, even in certain extreme Hinduist areas in India, we see the same thing, even within Adventism, in local church communities. It happens everywhere, because we're all human, and we're all prone to making the same mistakes everywhere, regardless of upbringing, religious conviction, political situation, status, education. And that's why it's so important to keep asking these questions.
So for a political landscape on the whole thing, then we'll just do that another day. But for bodily autonomy, I think we can call it quits and say thank you to everyone who joined us today. And thank you for our guest hosts for this week. I know that you all enjoyed having with us. You are absolutely enjoying the comments. Mr. Storm, who clearly is on vacation and needs to be on vacation, says it's everywhere. Yes, we understand your point, Mr. Storm, about
we do. We'll have to come back to
That's a political conversation. This was about bodily autonomy. So I'm glad I picked this subject. He can come back and do politics. He can come back and do politics. We'll just do bodily autonomy. We're fine. We hope that in your bodily autonomy, you are okay, that you're doing well, that even though you're on the dark side, that you will go and do the necessary things to keep yourself mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally well. Seek help, ask questions, reach out, do what is necessary. We are obviously entering the winter period soon enough. We're in autumn.
Yeah.
Let's not rush to winter, but we're entering autumn. And the excitement of the leaves changing will soon give way to the freezing cold. So please be mindful of oneself as you enter this period. But more than that, be mindful of those to your left, to your right, and in your community around
Absolutely.
you. It's important that you understand that we live in an entire community. No man is an island, no woman is an island. We are together. So thank you for joining us on the dark side.
Yes. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening. We will catch Pastor Guisele on taking notes coming up soon. So watch the space for that information. And that is on leadership, which is always fun. So you can get your notepads out and have a look for that. But for now, good night and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.